Princess Alice's entire family was struck by a devastating outbreak of diphtheria. Despite her tireless efforts to care for them, she was losing the battle against the relentless illness. Tragedy struck hardest when her youngest daughter, Marie, succumbed to the disease. Shattered, Alice broke the heartbreaking news to her beloved son, who dissolved into anguished, jagged sobs. Overwhelmed by his despair, Alice acted on instinct, offering him a tender kiss of comfort, a seemingly small gesture that would soon prove to be tragically fatal. Princess Alice of the United Kingdom was born on April 25, 1843, at Buckingham Palace. She was the second daughter and third child of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert. She had 8 siblings, making her one of 9 children in total. In the line of succession, Alice was behind both Vicky, who was Victoria's firstborn, and Prince Bertie, who, despite being born second, was first in line because male heirs took precedence. While Bertie's education prepared him to rule, Vicky and Alice were equipped with languages and practical skills, such as cooking and gardening. A sensitive, artistic child, Alice was close to her siblings, looking after the younger ones that followed. But Alice became deeply distressed when Vicky went away to be married in 1858. When their father became fatally ill in December 1861, Alice took on the role of caregiver, nursing him until his passing. This selfless act allowed Queen Victoria to continue fulfilling her royal duties. Following his death, the Queen entered a prolonged period of intense mourning, and Alice was the strength that her mother, Queen Victoria, relied upon to face her overwhelming grief. A daunting responsibility at any age, Alice became her mother's confidant and unofficial private secretary, skillfully managing both government and family matters. It was young Alice who carried the weight of the family on her shoulders during this challenging period and became the representative of the monarchy as Victoria pulled back from public life. But even then, Alice knew she would soon have to leave the family she loved so dearly. As early as 1860, the Queen had been looking for a husband for Alice. The ideal candidate had to be a royal of equal social standing, but the Queen also insisted that her children marry for love. Having rejected both the Prince of Orange and a Prussian prince, the list was narrowed to Prince Louis of Hesse, the nephew of the Duke of Hesse. He had not been the highest in rank on the list of potential grooms, but after he attended the Ascot races in 1860, it was clear that Alice and also her parents had taken a liking to him. The couple were engaged in April 1861, but Prince Albert's death cast a pall over the wedding, which took place in July 1862. Although Alice wore a magnificent white gown for the ceremony, she was dressed in black mourning clothes, both before and after the wedding. However, the plans for a magnificent royal wedding were set aside due to family circumstances, and the couple were married in a small ceremony at Osborne House on the Isle of Wight. Queen Victoria was shielded from view of the ceremony by her sons, while Alice's younger sisters were her bridesmaids. Alice's uncle Ernest stepped in to give her away, since her father had passed away. The day itself was wet and miserable, which only added to the deep sadness felt by the family due to Albert's absence. Queen Victoria wrote a letter to Vicky, her eldest daughter who was at her home in Prussia, stating that the wedding was more like a funeral than a wedding, and later called the day the saddest day she could remember. It must have been difficult for Alice and Louis to find happy moments in their day, especially as Alice was only allowed to wear her wedding gown for the ceremony before changing back into her mourning clothes. Despite the sad start to their married life, Alice and Louis were happy together in the early years. They had an enjoyable honeymoon before beginning their lives together in Darmstadt, in the Grand Duchy of Hesse and by Rhine. Despite being welcomed enthusiastically on her arrival to Darmstadt, Alice struggled to settle into life in Hesse. As a princess of the United Kingdom, Alice had been used to the highest standards of living, whereas in Hesse she had to make do with a repurposed home next to a busy street and a much smaller income. Nevertheless, Alice tried her hardest to fit into life in her new realm and dedicated her time to charity work and studying art. In 1863, the first of the couple's children was born. Baby Victoria arrived while Alice was attending the wedding of her brother, the Prince of Wales and Alexandra of Denmark. The baby was born in the presence of her grandmother, the Queen, who quickly made it clear to Alice that she did not like her parenting style. Alice wished to breastfeed her own children, an idea which appalled Victoria, but she persisted and raised her children as she wished. By 1874, the couple had 7 children. Aside from her role as a mother, Alice supported numerous charities, primarily devoting herself to women's causes. She became interested in nursing and befriended Florence Nightingale. This interest became useful when Hesse was caught up in the Austro-Prussian War on the side of Austria in 1866. This war meant that Alice and her sister Victoria, the Crown Princess of Prussia, were set against each other as enemies. During the war, Alice visited the sick, and her charities took over the running of the state military hospitals. Hesse fared badly at the end of the war and lost both wealth and territory, which deeply upset Alice. especially as her sister celebrated Prussia's victory. In May 1873, Alice faced yet another tragedy when her youngest son, Friedrich, fell from a window and died. He had haemophilia, which most likely made the injuries of the fall much worse. Alice felt lonely and did not receive the emotional support she needed from her mother or husband. The strain began to show in her marriage to Louis, and their relationship was never the same afterward. In the wake of this tragedy, Alice threw herself into her charity work and spent time on projects on social reforms and housing problems. In 1877, Louis became the Grand Duke of Hesse, following the deaths of his father and brother in quick succession. Alice was greeted as Grand Duchess by the people of Darmstadt, with support and enthusiasm that nobody expected. But she found the increase in her responsibilities and pressure from her elevated position hard to deal with. Alice began rolling out transforms against the poor conditions in her realm, but in the midst of this, her own household was struck down with an illness. By November 1878, all but one of Alice and Louis's children had been struck down with diphtheria. 4-year-old Marie died from the disease on the 15th of November. With one child taken by such a dreadful illness and 4 others still suffering from it, Alice was heartbroken and wrote to her mother that the pain is beyond words. Sadly, the tragedy did not end there, as Alice soon contracted the disease after kissing her son Ernest while he was grieving the death of his sister. All of the Grand Ducal family, apart from Princess Elizabeth, were in the grips of the disease at this stage. Alice died on the 14th of December, the anniversary of her father's death. Her final words had been, "Dear Papa," as she must have been reflecting on the death of her father at the time. Princess Victoria mourned her sister deeply, but was not allowed to attend her funeral due to the hostilities between their nations. Alice was the first child of Victoria and Albert to die, and her mother survived her by 2 decades. Even after Alice's death, her family continued to suffer terrible tragedies. Alice's daughter Alix went on to marry Tsar Nicholas II of Russia, and Elizabeth married Grand Duke Sergei Alexandrovich of Russia. These choices of marriage partners were a fatal mistake for Alice's daughters, as both were brutally murdered by the Bolsheviks, as were Alix's 5 children, which led to the end of the Romanov dynasty. In 1978, Alice's grandson Louis Mountbatten was assassinated by the IRA. Her daughters Alix and Irene both passed the haemophilia gene on. It seems that the more recent descendants of Alice of the United Kingdom experienced better luck and happier times. Her great-grandson was Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. He celebrated 70 years of happy marriage and lived surrounded by his children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. He dedicated his life to philanthropy and royal duties, just as his great-grandmother Alice did.